For a prison that was notorious for being apparently inescapable, there were a number of escapes and attempted escapes between 1936 and 1962. So here are the stories behind some of the craziest escapes from Alcatraz Island. We're starting off the list with the most famous escape from Alcatraz, that being the trio of bank robbers, Frank Morris, John Anglin, and his brother Clarence Anglin. This is one of the most well-crafted prison escapes in history. Honestly, you kind of gotta tip your hat. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers began planning their escape several months before the actual event. They had discovered a vulnerable spot in the prison structure, so using simple tools like spoons and a homemade drill, the trio started chipping away the vent openings in their cell's walls. They also created life vests and a makeshift raft from raincoats. On the night of June 11th, 1962, the three of them climbed through the holes they'd made and entered a utility corridor. From there, they reached the prison roof and used the raft to paddle away from the island. The escape was discovered the next morning during the routine bed check. The guards found the empty cells, the improvised tools, and the fake heads they'd made to make it appear like they had been sleeping in their beds. Very nice touch. The only thing authorities never found was the prisoners. For years, there was always the question of whether they'd made it and lived in freedom or if they drowned in the San Francisco Bay. But in 2014, the FBI received a very interesting letter. It was from someone claiming to be John Anglin. The letter read, "My name is John Anglin. I escaped from Alcatraz in June 1962. Yes, we all made it that night, but barely." He went on to say that Frank Morris had died in 2005 and Clarence Anglin passed in 2008. Then he went on to write, "If you announce on TV that I will be promised to just go to jail for no more than a year and get medical attention, I will write back to you to let you know exactly where I am. I am 83 years old and in bad shape. I have cancer." So, was the letter genuine? Well, the FBI did a forensic handwriting analysis, comparing John Anglin's handwriting to the letter they'd received, and it wasn't deemed to be 100% genuine, but they couldn't write it off either. It was inconclusive. Next up is the case of Theodore Cole and Ralph Rowe. This was the second ever escape attempt made from Alcatraz. Both Cole and Rowe were bank robbers in Oklahoma. They'd already attempted independent escapes from McAllister Prison in Oklahoma before eventually being transferred to Alcatraz in 1936. On December 16th, 1937, a dense fog covered San Francisco Bay and reduced visibility on Alcatraz Island, leveling the atmosphere here. And so were Cole and Rowe, who were working in the prison's mat shop and were like, this is the perfect time. During a routine head count at 1 p.m., all prisoners were accounted for. But by the next count, at 1:30, Cole and Rowe were missing. They'd managed to create a hole in a window using a hacksaw blade, covered up the damage with grease and shoe polish, and escaped down to a beach by forcing open a gate with a wrench taken from the tire shop. And that wrench was all that was ever found. Nobody knows exactly what happened to these two. Authorities assumed they drowned shortly after their escape. The thick fog would have made it hard for them to be spotted, sure, but it also would have made it tough for them to get their bearings and, make it to shore. Plus, it was December, not the best time for a dip, but there's always the chance they made it, and they remained on the FBI's most wanted list. Next on the list, we have the 1943 escape. 4 prisoners, James Borman, Harold Martin Brest, Floyd Garland Hamilton, and Fred John Hunter, planned their escape from the industry building's mat shop. They managed to cut some of the bars on a window. They also assembled 4 cans that contained army uniforms, which they were then going to use as flotation devices. So after cutting the bars, 4 inmates overpowered 2 guards, tying them up and gagging them. Then they escaped through the window, but the guards were able to break free and alert the other guards as to their escape. The tower guards opened fire on them as they started swimming away. Brest and Borman were hit. Brest was picked up by authorities, but Borman sank, and his body was never found. Fred John Hunter hid in a nearby cave, but was discovered about 2 hours later. Now, all that was left was Floyd Hamilton. He was in a very good position. The guards thought he'd been hit by gunfire and drowned just like Borman, but Hamilton was actually still alive. He'd been hiding in the same cave as Hunter, under a pile of tires. He was so close. They thought he was dead. Like, what incredible luck is that? Well, he squandered it. 2 days later, Hamilton climbed back up the cliff, and through the same window they jumped out of. He tried hiding under a pile of material in the storeroom, but was found there the next morning. Dude, he was in a cave under a pile of tires. Like, there's your flotation device. He could have hopped back in the water and swam away. Instead, he tried to hide back in the prison. Next up is John Paul Scott and Darrell Lee Parker. This was the final escape made from Alcatraz. It's also famous for being the only definitive case where a prisoner made it to shore from Alcatraz just from swimming. There are possible cases as discussed before, but again, not 100% certain they actually made it to land. Scott and Parker worked as quietly and discreetly as possible, using a makeshift saw to cut through the bars on a kitchen window in the cell house. After cutting through the bars, the two climbed through the window and ran to the edge of the island, leaping into the water. Parker was found alive off the main island, on top of a small rock formation known as Little Alcatraz. He'd gotten too tired and was forced to give up, but Scott managed to swim all the way to Fort Point beneath the Golden Gate Bridge. He was found by a group of teenagers. He had hypothermia and was suffering from extreme exhaustion. His freedom was short-lived, being picked up by authorities and taken back to Alcatraz. Aaron Burgett and Clyde Johnson. Burgett and Johnson seized an opportunity while working on garage duty to overpower a guard. Then they jumped into the water, attempting to swim away from the island. They were using inflated plastic bags as makeshift flotation devices, not the best material. Burgett also tied wooden boards to his feet, trying to create swimming fins, which seems kind of unnecessary. Police caught up with Johnson and threw him back in prison, but Burgett disappeared. Authorities weren't sure if he drowned or actually made it to shore, but 2 weeks later, he was found dead, floating in the bay. This next escape attempt happened in 1938 and was carried out by another trio of prisoners. So Rufus Franklin, Thomas R. Limerick, and James C. Lucas attacked and took the life of a guard named Royal C. Clyde in the woodwork shop of the Industries building using a claw hammer. Then the three men made their way to the roof, but an armed guard shot Franklin and Limerick, who both died of their injuries. Lucas was eventually cornered by the guards and surrendered. Now, this next one took a lot of patience and smarts. Also, unlike most of the escapes on this list, it was carried out by one guy alone, John K. Giles. Giles had been sentenced for attempting to rob the Denver and Rio Grande Western mail train. He had a history of escape, began doing his time at McNeil Island, but was later transferred to Alcatraz, being that he was an escape risk. So why not send him to a prison where a bunch of people managed to escape? On July 31st, 1945, Giles, wearing a stolen Army technical sergeant's uniform he had slowly pieced together while working in the laundry, hopped on an Army ferry at the Alcatraz wharf. He was able to get on the ship because he had a job working dock duty at the prison, unloading vessels transporting military laundry to Alcatraz. So Giles was found to be missing when a head count was done at the prison and the search began. At the same time, the Army boat realized there was an extra man on board. Assistant Warden E.J. Miller chased after the Army boat on a small speedboat until it reached Fort McDowell on Angel Island. Alcatraz officials informed Fort McDowell to keep everyone on the boat, but the boat captain assumed that meant, well, don't let anyone leave the boat without a pass. Well, Giles had forged a pass and left the boat, but he was being followed. After disembarking, he was questioned by Lieutenant Gordon L. Kilgore. Kilgore noticed Giles' uniform was a little off, and he also took a closer look at his pass and realized it had been forged. Giles was then detained and handed back over to authorities. Next on the list, we have the case known as the Alcatraz Blastout. This one was even more violent than the 1938 escape attempt. Way more violent. Not only did multiple prisoners die in this incident, but a couple guards too. This was a 2-day incident that happened from May 2nd to the 4th in 1946. This involved 6 prisoners: Bernard Coy, Joseph Gretzer, Sam Shockley, Clarence Carnes, and Marvin Hubbard and Moran Thompson. They took over the cell house after overpowering correctional officers, gaining access to the weapons room, and grabbing the keys to the recreation yard door. Their plan was to escape by boat from the dock, but they didn't have the keys to the outside door, so instead they took 2 correctional officers hostage. Gretzer took the life of one of the guards, William Miller. The second hostage, Harold Stites, ended up being by friendly fire from outside. Shockley, Thompson, and Carnes ended up returning to their cells, but the other 3, Coy, Gretzer, and Hubbard, weren't ready to throw in the towel and they died for it. The Marines ended up being called in, and they took all 3 of them out, also injuring 18 other men, 17 of which were guards. This next one ended pretty quick. It is embarrassing, though, that it even happened, because these guys managed to escape from D Block, which was supposedly Alcatraz's most impenetrable unit. This was a big group of inmates, including 5 guys: Arthur Doc Barker, William Martin, Rufus McCain, Henry Young, and Dale Stamphill. Somehow, they managed to break free from the cell house and reached the shore on Friday the 13th, 1939. The guys had gathered by the shore to start putting together a makeshift raft when a watchtower guard spotted them and opened fire. Barker was Stamphill was wounded, and the rest of the inmates were gathered up and sent to solitary confinement. And finally, we have the escape of Huron Ted Walters. Walters had been serving a 30-year sentence for robbery, a violent attack, and auto theft. But he started formulating a plan to escape when he noticed something. He realized that weekends had fewer guards on duty, and the ones that were on the job mostly had their eyes on the recreation yard. So his plan was to slip out of the New Industries building where he worked in the laundry. On Saturday, August 7th, Walters tried to cut through 2 security fences, but the wire cutters he'd stolen weren't able to cut through, so he had to climb the fences instead. He ended up making it to the shore, but he'd messed up his back falling from the second fence. Captain of the guards Henry Weinhold and associate Warden E.J. Miller, same guy who chased that boat in that last case I talked about, they picked him up, and Walters was returned to the cell house. He ended up being placed in solitary confinement. With all that said, I've been your host James, and I will catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.